When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night.
Hey there, believers. I got another fun episode for you today. This week, I'm bringing on Greg Walter. He's an author of the book, The RidgeWalkers. Those of you on YouTube, I'm looking down and reading this because my memory is not that great. He's a research historian, Sasquatch enthusiast, and a U.S Coast Guard veteran. So thank you, sir, for your service. He's going to come on today, talk about his experiences, talk about his book, and just get into all things weird. You know, I've had a lot of stuff going on with this show. Had a really powerful guest. I say he's powerful because he's a man of God, and he's a true man of God. We've talked on air, we've talked off air, but I really believe this man is anointed, and we're going to move forward with doing as much as we can for the Lord while still keeping it fun for everybody on the show. I don't know. I feel like things are getting better. Things are blessed. It's a blessing. So I just want to thank everybody that listens. Thank everybody that has been praying for the show, praying for me. I appreciate that. I love you guys. And I'll do the same for you. You know, shoot me an email. If you don't want to come on the air to talk about whatever, shoot me an email, message me on Instagram. I try to get on there as much as possible. And I've made some good relationships, some true friends through this show. So if you need somebody to talk to, man, holler at me. All right. No further delay. Let's go ahead and bring on Greg. You, sir.
All right. Thank you. Got it. All right. Hello.
How's it going, Greg?
Good. I am well.
Good. Glad to hear that. You are the author of a book titled RidgeWalkers, correct?
Yes.
All right. I haven't had a chance to order on Amazon. I try to get everybody's book, but it's, things have been real rapid fire here this whole summer. So I apologize for not, being knowledgeable in advance. Why don't you tell us about your book?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Greg Walter, author of RidgeWalkers in Two Worlds. And this was a story that was based on my personal experience with an encounter with one of these cryptids back 25 years ago. I don't have revisitations with them. I don't feed them apples at night and so forth like this. My experience was, it took me years to figure it out. I think a lot of people that run into these things realize that they ran into something very unusual. And I'm sort of an obsessive compulsive anyways. And so I did my requisite research in this, and it led me down the path of a spiritual world, mainly within Native American communities. And the more I researched, the more I realized that it was very universal. even though there's variances from tribe to tribe and region to region as to how they handle these things and what they represent. And, so that's kind of what fascinated me the most. The takeaway in all of this is that to think that there's, we see these things as these horror figures, these skinwalkers, these horrible fanged, et cetera, so forth. And that probably is for good reason. Much of that drives around, I believe, that it's how we've not been able to live sustainably on our own world. And that goes into problems that even if you're the staunchest environmentalist, you've contributed to it. And so, sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
And so so within that, it was just something that I learned a lot. I'm a student of the native lore. And not just in my region, which is in the Pacific Northwest. My encounter was in the Southern Oregon, Northern California borderlands. And one of the things I hope to enlighten the audience with today, because since you guys are West Virginia, I believe, based.
Yes, sir.
That in regards to the concept of when you go west, you get more and more into these places called wilderness. So they're not state parks. They're within national forests, or public lands, but within those areas, the goal is to find places what I call untrammeled by man. And one of the things I find interesting in a lot of these shows that they do, especially movies and so forth like this, where they show the vast Pacific Northwest and these vast forests, and yet you look out onto a sea of clear cuts, and so, this thing of nobody's ever been there, wrong. There's pretty much anywhere in the United States that you're not within 20 miles of a road, if even closer. And so when you put it in that context, and that said, I should also include in that within that, there's areas that the native tribes have used for centuries, not millions of years, but centuries, where they go up and they basically commune with their gods and heroes. And there's even a quote in my book. I'll quote this from one of the chapters. It was from chapter 25, and this is from Ishi, which was a book, basically by the Krobers, and they were with the Department of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley back at the turn of the century, when this poor starving Indian stumbled out of the woods, and they took him under their wing, and he lived at the Department of Anthropology, their museum, or their facility there in Berkeley, what a great opportunity to learn about native tribes by somebody that was a native tribesman, the last of his tribe.
Right.
And the quote in here is that those living in distant worlds could read and know how the people spoke and who were their gods and heroes and what was their way. And that was very thematic to me, running throughout my book. And so what I did was I took this story, I took my encounter, and drawing from the lore and so forth like this, but also just on following the elements of story. And my goal in this one was to basically align it with what I would write as a screenplay. And so you've got your protagonist, you've got your antagonists, you've got, your heroes and villains, and how that plays out. But sprinkled in there, I kind of give little hints or little clues throughout the book of my personal experience and my thoughts on how I arrived at what I feel these things are and what they represent to our world. And so, and I get really into, because it's sort of like, if you're going to talk about Jesus, you can't really talk about Jesus without talking about God.
Right.
And the God would be the little people. And, and it's not like I woke up from eating mushrooms one night and decided this is how things are. This actually carries in the lore going back, at least a couple thousand years. We don't really know. I mean, there's not a timeline, but it's kind of interesting. One quote I remember was that, that within the UK, or within within Ireland that the Irish, used to worship and had altars for the little people, and those were replaced with the statues of the saints.
Mhm.
And so that was about 3,000 years ago. So here comes organized religion into the picture. And but to think that prior to that, they had their gods and heroes, and so that kind of begs this question that, inherently, is mankind steeped in some level of spirituality where, there's this higher being out there, and whether that's a salamander or, some big white guy with a beard on the throne, or whatever colored man this is, but it's a hominid. And, really throughout time, and all over the world, there's stories of giants and small people, and they're not necessarily small people. I mean, these things are, the way the little people, the way they're described is some of them have bird feet, some of them have reptile feet, and then the top half of them are, basically a human of some sort. So there are these weird things, but they call them immortals because they live for 2,000 to 3,000 years, and they go on, and that's something that that I think I've drawn some distinctions there as far as between dwarfism, which is a medical ailment, like this. Those folks are in the fossil record.
Mhm.
And then also small people that are, and those are around the world. Some of that was driven on their environment, with regards to that, like on the Pacific Islands, if they were bigger, they wouldn't have been able to sustain themselves. And so they co-evolved into smaller people so they could survive. And then from there you get into the spiritual, the Menehune, the Woge, all these different entities like this. And the reason why I mention them is because, go figure, their requisite giants are not far behind in this. And so, and the thing that, because I became also a skeptic in this as far as Bigfoot, because of the fact we still to this day do not have physical evidence. And so within that, we struggle with this, they live in caves under the earth, and they inhabit, there's these vast places no humans ever been to. I mean, hey guys, you know what? In 2019, Yosemite National Park saw 4.4 million people. They're getting almost 1 million people a month in Zion. I mean, it is unbelievable, the mass of humanity. And they say that, like, the national parks have visitations in excess of 300 million people that beat out every Super Bowl, church gathering, everything imaginable. Nothing tops the visitation to the national parks. And so that speaks also, to finding these places that are what I call untrammeled by man. That's a Sierra Club quote. But and this is the thing, is that because you have to go into that natural setting if you even want to remotely, see one of these things. And so here I've pointed out that basically we don't have physical evidence. We seem to think they exist in caves and so forth like that. But, if you're familiar with grottos, what a grotto is. And yes, that's that funky place at the Playboy Mansion West, where it was all drippy and, with water and everything, with all the playmates hanging out. But there was also a grotto it's a spelunking club. And spelunking clubs, these are people that love speleological, anythings, and they're very good at exploring caves.
Right.
And yet they don't seem to run across, it's not like they chase out some group of big feet in a cave. And so these guys go to some pretty extreme lengths to find these caves, so it's something that I don't 100% buy into that. But I do, and so that's what made me cross into the cosmos, because the cosmos is the one field. I mean, I think we fully know about less than 3%. And so there's a lot of room to play in that world. And I'm kind of a neophyte, as far as learning cosmology, with regards to astrophysics and quantum mechanics and all the things about all of the wondrous parts of the theory of relativity. And so we're like babies crawling around the woods in this stuff. And so it's something that, we have a lot to learn in this, and it's the one field where it's like, okay, maybe there's something, that's, we come around to this dimensional portals, et cetera, et cetera. And, and so I played with the idea in my book that these things are in two worlds. And that actually follows several native beliefs. I think the Sioux had them where they're the sky people. The Blackfoot Nation had them the above the clouds people. In our region, they're known as the upslope people. And so all of them point like up there somewhere. And and that's also why a lot of times these shamans or doctors or whatever would go to those places to basically learn from them, and they would communicate with them, and they had the ability to be able to get from them the future of what's happening with their tribe, whether they were going to run out of food, whether they would run into problems from fire or drought or any number of things like this. And so this is where it gave the doctor both power and opportunity to help the tribe in an otherwise inhospitable place. And that transcends at least a few thousand years. We don't, it's hard to say how far it really goes back. We really don't know. But it's interesting as far as when you take that aspect of it. And so there's my rant for the morning.
That's a lot to unpack, but it's super interesting. I'll see here. I took several notes on what you were saying. This is going to have to be on my must-buy list of books. I can already tell, that if it's packed with this much information that goes into native lore. I'm absolutely fascinated by native lore too, by the way. Over here in West Virginia, where I'm at, I don't know if you're familiar with the Adena people or the mound builders, but they had ritual burial mounds all through my area here, up to the Snake Mountain in Ohio. And we're recording this late July. In about 10 days, I'm supposed to take off and check out a rediscovered snake mound that was found here in my county. It's been off the record for like 45 years. Nobody's even made mention of it, but hopefully that little expedition works out. But yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated in native culture. And talking about untrammeled land, I think you would do well if you came over to West Virginia sometime and checked it out. About 80% of our state is under canopy. It's under treetop. There are millions of acres with no homes. No, there might be some logging roads from 150, 200 years ago.
Right.
But
where you guys have it over the West is the amount of moisture you've gotten in the last 10 to 50 years, even beyond.
Oh yeah.
That's created, literally a multi-layered canopy.
Yeah.
And that's also, that creates a diversity of amphibians. It does all these different things, obviously based on the quality of the water, and so how many springs do you have kicking around where you can go right up and drink out of them?
Right. Yeah. Like Appalachia, this Appalachian mountain range is like the second most biodiverse place on earth. So yeah, you nailed it. You're absolutely right. I think you would do well here. I think you'd enjoy it here.
Well, the other question I would have for you too is that the Adena, now what would be the language, or was that part of the Cherokee?
It predates any native tribe. That's they just hung the title Adena people and mound builders on it. They predate the Cherokee, Shawnee, Pawnee, Wyandot tribes. It's an ancient culture.
One of my friends wrote a book. This was my friend John Roth from the Oregon Caves. And I'll get into this a little more, but he wrote this book called American Elves. Oh, wow. And it's basically a bibliography of the little people based on 380 ethnic groups throughout the Western Hemisphere. And you can't find it anymore. He printed like all of 100 of them or some stupid.
Oh, wow.
And but like half of the book is bibliography, and so the references are just innumerable. And this is where, it's like along with learning about whatever respective tribe or linguistic group you're dealing with, you then go into a certain part of that that goes into their creation lore. And they've got some far out stories. I mean, we have them where there's these 25-foot salamanders in a lake, and they eat the kids and all this fun stuff. Anything that eats the kids, I mean, what's not to like?
Right.
And, because it was a way with which you don't do such and so, or like this. And so Bigfoot, salamanders, sharks, the boogeyman, Jason, whatever.
That's it.
Right. And so that all follows a common theme. And but that is interesting with the Adena. Yeah, this guy tracks it out with linguistic stock. And so if you can follow the language, then from there you'll follow the culture.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I wish there were more copies, because I would love to get a copy of that. Because talking about the little people, and you said it would have to start with them. If you don't mind, could you break down the little people a little more? Because
sure,
that's a hot topic. People love to hear about the little people.
Yeah, and it's something that there's actually a book that you can get, and it's this one here, about the Cherokee little people were real. Okay. And it gets into this whole thing in Western North Carolina, the Judaculla Rock.
Oh yeah.
There's also a Redbird Rock or something in Kentucky. There's several of these rocks you guys have going on that that we don't know how far back they date, but they still follow the linguistic stuff. And this is where some tribes had it where the little people were very active and others really did not. I mean, it's not that they weren't there. It's just that it's at least harder for us Caucasian Euro-American folks to follow it. Sometimes what's fun to do is go to your local university library, and somewhere buried in there, they're going to have their anthropology department. And within that, you get into the dissertations, the different papers, and that's where you dive into this, especially oral histories that were told by the tribes. The University of California at Berkeley, within their anthropological library, they also have their spoken language part. And those are just far out. And it's so much fun because and the creation lore, I mean, yeah, is it crazy and weird? Yeah. But so is ours, so is Christianity, so is Catholicism. So I mean, it's funny on how it all follows this fairly common theme, so that's one thing that fascinates me, is that, how if the Native Americans were kicking around, that part of Jerusalem, 2,000 years ago, I mean, they would have seen some interesting activities, right. But instead they were relegated to, somewhere off of Sasquatch Island, somewhere north of Vancouver Island, and and Que Paso, but yeah, but it is fun, and that's, the South Pacific is another hot spot. With the little people, and Africa, and I haven't read much on China, but I guarantee they were there, and the same thing obviously with Europe, north, south, or east, or west. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, right up to the point we're right on our box of cereal, and they're always after me Lucky Charms, that's the little people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's interesting how some cultures depict them as, they had their own villages, their own tribes, or whatever. Others depicted the little people as tricksters and spirits, and right. It's such a wide array, but there has to be some truth in there. There has to, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and that's what happens when, you could imagine that great migration through the Bering Land Bridge and these people coming out. One of the things my friend John Roth, the guy that wrote the book, pointed out was how, it was about 14,000 years ago that these dung piles, that were these huge dung piles from the mastodons and the Columbian mammoths, and this big megafauna, and then that right after that, charcoal came into the picture. No. Sorry about that. Charcoal came into the picture, and what happened then was what happened then? That was the incursion of man, and so here comes fire onto the fossil record, and then as that happened, the dung piles, i.e., the mastodons, so forth, died off, and part of that was that that the hominids were killing them. But part of that also was just this natural die-off that was already occurring from various cataclysmic events. I mean, it could have been like the Missoula flood was a big one. There was also the eruption of Mount Mazama out in Oregon. There were several things that just set the stage for the demise of these large creatures, and then obviously following that were the short-faced bears, the saber-toothed cats. Right. All of these guys fell off the record. And so, which is another thing too with Bigfoot, and I feel like the Pendak orang and so forth like this, or excuse me, it's the Gigantopithecus, that those guys are more, I think, in the orang family, whereas Bigfoot is this completely different shaped character, even though upwards of 10 feet. Perhaps one of the closer ones would have been that discovery there in Lovelock Cave in Nevada with those giants, these giant red guys. Yeah. They're red-haired, orange-haired, like this. Yeah. Now that's kind of an anomaly, or in other words, not the usual finding, but at least there we've got them in the fossil record. Never mind the fact they've hit it, so it's not exactly an open topic, in church circles these days. But we have evidence, and that's one thing that I follow with this is that with regards to, are they in the fossil record? Are they not? If they're not, why not? In this business of, well, they're too elusive and wild animals eat the bones and okay, whatever. I don't know if you've ever run around with contract archaeologists and watch what they do. They're pretty remarkable at finding these things, village sites, old forts, trails, roads. My specialty as a hobby is I collect old Forest Service maps. Nice. It's a very strange hobby. But it's fun because they do show the old roads on there, the military roads, all this kind of stuff like this. So, in a lot of those places, especially when you get more arid, not so much in those wet places, like the Appalachians, but in the more arid West, those roads are still on the ground. Those trails are still there. Yes, the definition of insanity is trying to find old pack trails in somewhere like the Olympic Peninsula, which is a temperate rainforest. Bad.
I'd say so. Hey, Greg, you said that all of this stemmed from a personal experience that you had in Northern California, right? Or Southern Oregon?
Yes.
Would you mind getting into that experience and telling us about what happened to you that time? Sure. Was it just one encounter? I don't mean to say just, but one is enough. But was it the one time?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and so I was at a place in my life where, first of all, I was in really good shape. I was going through some changes with who I was, what I was doing, and so forth like this, and I decided to go on this like a 60-mile kind of a loop backpack trip in a place that I didn't think was explored much. And so it was kind of off the map as far as like a high mountain lake and let's go climb to the highest peak and all this fun stuff like this. I was more into these like mid-elevation, ridgeline, ponds, meadows, just wild area, place where people didn't normally go because it didn't offer these spectacular features like, what we normally seek out. And so, and I heard that it was a bit of a sacred area, and I didn't know, anything about that. And so I take off on this trip, and the first night I spent in one place, and I burned some sage, and then from there, I went back to my truck because it was kind of like a jog, off the main beaten path, and I go back to my truck. And I kind of resupply a little bit and I take off on this trip. And it was night number 2, technically, on this trip. that I came to this place, and there was this beautiful cedar grove and this open meadow. In later years, I would visit that place, and it was also a place of what we call communal bear pooping. And so where you'd find like piles and piles and piles and piles of bear poop. And and the bears, they probably had certain places they like to go to the bathroom or something. I don't know. It was very weird. There's a couple times we've run into this though in the Klamath Mountains. And so at any rate, I didn't pay much attention to that at that time. But I set up my tent and I go over to this spring, and there's this beautiful giant salamander in the spring. I went, "Oh wow, you are so pretty," and I picked him up and thanked him for being there and all this good stuff. And I put him back in the spring, and he went crawling back into this root wad underneath these huge cedars. And the whole meadow permeated. I mean, it's like somebody kept sharpening their pencils in school. That smell of incense cedar. And so anyways, then I continued on, and it was the third night that I got to a place where there was a divide that split off. It was like its own separate little mountain range. And I was up where like several drainages kind of came together, and there was also a geologic change. And at the time, I didn't pay much attention to that, but I recognized the vegetation as different kinds of vegetation that would normally be found on what's called serpentine. And serpentine it's kind of the Earth's mantle has now come to the surface. And in the greater Southwest Oregon, Northwest California, we have the largest unbroken piece of serpentine, if you will, that extends for at least a couple hundred miles.
Wow.
And that brings in all of this, the serpentine botany with it. And so, because these are plants that have adapted and co-evolved into where, most plants like to be calcium rich, mineral poor. These guys like to be mineral rich, calcium poor. And so it becomes the whole science and botany and so forth. But anyways, so I camp at this place. There was an old fire ring there because it was a trail break off that took off out on this other, separate ridgeline. And so I'm camped at this place, and I noticed like next to my campsite, there was all this like smeared mud, like something was in a fight, was all I could figure, like bears were brawling or something. I didn't know what to make of it. And by the way, this area has a lot of bears. I mean, in the meadows, pretty much like clockwork, there's at least a couple bears out there, so real common to see bears up there.
Right.
So much so that it's fun just to watch them, but anyway, so then from there, I go up on this kind of low divide, and there was some tarns up there, or some ponds, and I just took note of them, and there was the floristic beauty and all the, like all the wildflowers were in bloom because they have a real narrow window before everything gets real dry. So anyways, I then came back to my camp. The sun was going down. I decided to take a bath and dump some water over my head. So I warmed up some water on my stove. And I walked over to this flat rock, and I looked down, and there's this footprint, like a bear footprint, like a human bear footprint. And okay, this doesn't fit. What the hell is this? And it had a curvature at the heel. I remember this. And I actually took a picture of it, but in the picture, you can't see it very well. It's like, nice picture of some gravel, Greg. So at any rate, and I would take the picture like the next day, but at any rate, so I saw this bear footprint and went, wow, okay. Am I about to have a visit with a cryptid tonight? That was on my mind. And so I went back to my tent. The sun went down, the moon was coming up. It was the first moon of a blue moon. A blue moon is where you have 2 full moons in a month.
That's right.
And so at any rate, the moon hadn't come up yet. It was very dark. And all of a sudden, I've got this thing. I mean, I hear this crash, crash, crash in this amphitheater area where, I was basically on 3 sides where there was, like a hill or, steep boulders, brush, so forth like this. There was a little trail, a little game trail. And this thing just emerged like as though he was in the amphitheater with me. And, it didn't sound like it came down from the hillside or anything. and so he stomp like this, and he goes over to these. There were like these ponds that were there with the Darlingtonia plants. They're these weird. They eat, they eat bugs. Are a carnivorous plant, and so at any rate, they this thing stops at the water line there, and I could see him kind of hunched over, and I hear this slurp, 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 drinking, and and so at any rate, I am I'm just mesmerized by this. And then the thing gets up, and I hear the splash, 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 crash, 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 stomp, 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 doing a semicircle around me, watching me. I mean, I knew this thing, had eyes on me. And I mean, I had a flashlight in my hand. I was standing right next to my tent. And I get this message in my head that says, don't even think about it. I mean, like, no, just leave that light off, and so at any rate, this thing does a semicircle, and finally I got to see it. And I mean, it was definitely a biped, probably standing about 8.5 feet tall, moving at a very measured pace, looked at me with these icy gray eyes, and I couldn't figure out, where in the hell have I seen that before? And I finally flashed back. It was in a Tarzan comic book with the apes, like this. Okay, so anyways, so I see this, and I'm watching it stomp, 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 and it just goes down the hill, drops down the hill, and disappears. And so then I'm left with the quiet of the night, out like 8 or 9 miles on this ridge line, and by myself. And so at that point, there's nothing I can do. I mean, what am I going to do? Pack up and run? Because the thing I saw, I mean, this thing could run down a deer at a dead run, no problem. It was just that athletic, so it wasn't like the frumpy pregnant Bigfoot, in the Patterson Gimlin film, and so, but it moved my life. I mean, it was so aberrant, and at the time I remember, did I just see a god? I mean, I didn't know what to think of this thing. Right. And because you just don't run into 8-foot bipeds at night out in the forest like this. And I had about I don't know, maybe a 2-minute experience with this thing, including the water drinking episode. And so it disappears. From there, the rest of the pack trip, I mean, when I got to this meadow and there was a lake, this was like a few miles distant. Well, I went down to another lake to check and see if there were footprints there. I didn't think, stupid me, I didn't think to walk over where this thing was walking to see if I could find a footprint there. I don't know, but anyways, so then I go on, I continue on my pack trip, and I'm running into animals, and they're kind of like coming up to me, and I mean, I just felt like I was like one with nature, let's call it. Absolutely. Yeah, and there's an interesting, just as a side note, just recently I bumped across this in the Sioux Indian lore that they say that, like, if you could go up and touch one, that then it gives you some amazing powers as far as being able to relate to nature. Wow. So side note there. So anyways, continue on the pack trip, had a great time. Got back to my truck, took off out of there. When I was driving down the hill, by the way, I see this marten go running at, this little wild animal. Right. And years later, they would discover that as the Humboldt marten that was brought back out of extinction. There was an isolated population nobody knew about.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of far out. And so then from there, in the ensuing years, I did like one more trip in there by myself, full moon. There was no footprints, no Bigfoot, no salamander, no, like this. Just had a great time. The second time, the fellow that was calling was wanting to talk to me. We went out there, and this was the first time I'd taken anybody out there with me, and we run into these guys that were part of this expedition with the Society of Cryptozoological Research. Okay. And there's a fellow there, it was the president of this group in New York. And it was kind of interesting because, well, it's like, oh no, we're just out here on a trip, but you know, and it's like we asked him, are you guys looking for Bigfoot? Oh no, not us. No. But have you heard anything? Seen anything? Knocks in the night, screams, like this. No, sorry, man. And so at any rate, but that guy would continue to go out there, and on his third trip out there, and this was like, I mean, he had to get pack horses and bring in all this equipment and test for turds and all this kind of mess. At any rate, he's doing all this activity in there, and on his third trip out there, he comes back, contracts an inoperable brain tumor and fell over dead in 6 weeks. Oh, wow. Okay. And, I thought, okay, that's the power of the little people. All it takes is, for some little deer to come running up, throw some dust on him and he's toast. I don't know. I mean, I'm extrapolating there, obviously, but, right. But, it showed me, it kind of taught me the power of the area. And the reason why, I actively try to discourage people from going up there, unless you have the training. And that's the thing, is that, so then I dive into the native lore on this, and they have a very strict regimen on how they approach and see these things. I learned in later years that you knew you were on the right path going up there, and there were prayer spots you'd have to stop at. There were different places you would have to, go to and do a procedure or whatever. And you knew you were on the right path if you saw a salamander in a spring. Okay. And in later written lore, the salamander in the spring was actually the shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter would have been one of the little people. And there's one of two types that live on these ridge lines that are the immortals. And these immortals, so one is the water baby. That's what I saw. The other one is a land baby. And this is written up in their lore. It's almost in like doctoral dissertations. You have to find this stuff, to dig it out. But basically it was this lesson, in the procedure. And what I did basically on this trip was I followed what these doctors or shamans do to go up and communicate with this thing. I don't know the song. I've had it sung to me, but they have a song that they sing, and they sing to the Bigfoot. And then from there, that's a song of introduction that basically calls them in. And then they have a song seeking knowledge. And the knowledge could be that there's no salmon that are going to run next year. Prepare. There's going to be a blight on the acorns. You're not going to have the acorn harvest you expect. And so all these different things that could affect food security and, and obviously tribal survival. Wow. And so, and they've tapped into that, and they've got a procedure. And, and that's why I like these skinwalkers and all this kind of stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if there's somebody out there that knows how to communicate with those things. Now that person, another thing too with the little people, it's kind of a trip, is that since they live 2,000 to 3,000 years, that they're very sad. And the reason why they're sad is because they get to know a doctor or shaman 50 or 100 years, something like this. They develop a relationship with this one person, and then he dies. And then here comes another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And so, it's something that's just the bane of our mortality, as opposed to the immortality. Right. And those that walk with that, and birth that, and so it's kind of, it's really interesting though, when, to your audience, to dive into the local lore and learn more about that, and, and to tap into these, let's call them nature spirits, that, that can lead you to this giant, if that's what you seek. Just be careful of what you ask for, and you better know how to approach this thing, because what I saw was, there was no way I was going to pull a gun on him. And that kind of brings up another thing, is that if you carry cameras out there and guns and all this kind of stuff, even a hunting knife, probably a knife you might be able to get away with if it's not like oiled in a sheath. But these things pick up on that, and they're very, very astute to the scent of these micro oils that are in like your cell phones and all this kind of equipment. And that's why what they do is they do the worst thing that you could imagine. They disappear.
Right.
You'll never see them. And
Wow.
so they're watching you, but you're not watching them. And that's just something to try going out there. Okay, you've tried the game camera route, and you've try going out there without any of that stuff, and try to follow a procedure, because that's one side of it. The other side of that too is that did what I experienced, was it an archetype? And because I have a friend that's a student of Jungian psychology, and within that, we get into the topic of archetypes. And how it's this very real hallucination that definitely happened. Wow, that was really powerful, But my rhetoric to that is that, do archetypes leave footprints?
Right.
And that's no, So yeah, and that's where hallucinations. That's great, and what you experienced was a hallucination. But if you saw footprints, or there was some other kind of physical evidence, then that kind of blows that out of the water.
Yeah.
I think, and so then we're back around to, so what is this thing? And what does it represent? And and to look back into the history of man and our relationship with these, where does it lead us? So yeah, I touch on this in the book, but see, once again, I had to follow story and plot and all that kind of stuff. But I do get into some of the spirituality of these things, and especially just the spirituality around nature, and how to think like the impact of the salmon, where the salmon come up the streams and basically they're eaten by bears. The bears go up in the forest and purge themselves. Literally barf up salmon, because there's so many salmon in those streams. They go back down and eat more salmon, so they're gorging. And but what that creates is the perfect fish fertilizer for a forest. And this happens over the course of 200,000 years.
Right.
And so this isn't anything new. But then within the last 150 years, we go in and do the overfishing on the salmon, the overlogging, knocking over these monarchs for trees. And then from there, so all it takes is a heat, a drought, any number of things like this. Well, then here comes fire. And and we've seen this just in natural cycles on the landscape, no doubt about it. But here, the difference now is that we've got 9 billion people on the planet, and so yeah, what upsets the apple cart, and to think that if you could talk to one of these things, are they portending this to you? Hey, bad things are going to happen. Here's how it's going to lay out.
Yeah.
I don't know about all that, but I had fun writing the book.
Yeah. Speaking of talking to these things, when you said that you had this message that you received, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, was it a message you received from this creature of don't even try that light?
It was just, it was a vibe. It was something that said, don't even think about it, and that, in a way, it's kind of funny when you think about that. Perhaps it was the way he looked at me. Sometimes you can look at somebody and, okay, don't mess with this guy,
Right.
kind of look. And so maybe that's just how I interpreted it. But yeah, that's another interesting point to this, because there's another guy that kind of follows, I think me and him are on the same page on this, Ron Moorhead.
Oh yeah, very familiar with Ron Moorhead.
Yeah. And and the thing with the Sierra sounds and so forth like that was another woo moment, because I just last year or something, they sent me the CD and I was listening to this, or I think it was like a year and a half ago. And I was listening to it, and then there was one sound with the weird noises that they made in this thing, and I went, I've heard that before. And I thought back, and so about 3 years before my encounter, I was up at the high mountain lake, and next to the big peak, and some hikers had left out of there, and I had to hike in. I mean, it was like a strong day and a half hike in there.
Oh, wow.
And at any rate, so I'm camped there by myself, moon about to come up, and I hear that sound, and I thought, that is the weirdest damn thing. It scared the bejesus out of me because it sounded like it was pretty close,
Right.
but it was yelling. It was like something was in a. It was rather stressful, and I didn't know what to think of it, and I was just freaked out. For a solid couple hours, and then it just went away. And so from there, I didn't see any bears, I didn't see any elk. I thought that's the strangest sounding coyote I've ever heard. That's how I wrote it off, and then pan ahead 27 years, here comes Ron and his, oh my God, that was it. And the thing that struck me with Ron's thing though, was that he, I think what it was that he researched it, and it came down to a certain native language stock, and he went to Mexico to even look at it further, because that's where that language stock really comes from. And then so I pull out my linguistic stock map of Northern California and Southern Oregon. Bingo, there's a like a big spot on the map that shows that language stock, and I went, oh my God, okay. And so if you could communicate, if you learn that language stock, perhaps now you can actually communicate with these things. Because they're not going to know. Sorry, they don't know the lingua franca of English.
Right.
Because we've only been on the landscape for at best 150, 200 years. 400 years maybe, depend how far west you go. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, pardon me, but so it's just something that that stuck at me, as far as knowing language. Yeah.
Wow. Well, the thought of communicating back, that's something that just escapes me, because
All right.
the visual of coming face to face with something like this, I think I would forget completely about trying to talk, trying to communicate. I'd probably be hoping that it just didn't see me or eat me or throw me through a tree or something. I'm hoping for that peaceful encounter. When you saw this, did you have a sense of fear, or was it just awe?
Both. I was absolutely freaked out, which, so the aberrant thing to do in that situation, could you imagine if you just started singing? And sometimes animals, they react in really interesting ways. Sometimes I sing to my rattlesnakes. I have these rattlesnakes. I live nearby. I take water out to the rattlesnakes. But sometimes you sing or just talk calmly to them, and they respond very nicely. They're watching you, and and because it's like, you're supposed to be scared of me. Hello.
Right.
And instead you're very calm, and they pick up on that, and that's the thing, because I tell my friends, if I take a friend out there with me or something, stop scaring the rattlesnakes, because we get freaked. Oh my God, rattlesnake. And it's the same with Bigfoot, whereas could you imagine being calm and, singing or playing a musical instrument like a flute or something like this, how that thing would react.
Right.
Because it's unexpected, and it's something that, could you actually draw them in? And this is where I think the encounter part, that people see these things, that these things come here from the other place. Let's pretend for a minute. And let's also pretend that when they come here, are they here for 2 hours, 2 days, 3 weeks, a full year? We don't know. The thing I saw could easily go across river canyons. I mean, this thing, you'll imagine the same range as a timber wolf, because they can lope right along.
Right.
So the opportunity of, like, even though you might be over in a separate mountain range, separate wilderness at some cabin or something like that, and all of a sudden you're getting rocks thrown at you. Yeah, okay. And, you know, but where did that thing come from? And did I experience a point of origin? And so where this thing transitioned to here at the moment that I was witnessing it.
Wow.
So that's another heavy, you know, I'm still sorting that one out.
Right.
You know, and I mean, look, guys, I'm not a scientist, you know, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a cosmologist. But this thing of dimensional theory, you know, really blows my mind. And I just, you know, I mean, like, where do we go with that until we really learn? I think Brian Greene cracked some level of dimensional theory, but at a very, very microscopic level. Yeah. And so, you know, how do we relate that to some 10-foot animal being able to use it? Right. You know, and what's the level of intelligence of that creature that can do that?
Right. And at that point, does it come into intelligence, or is it just some inherent ability of raising or lowering a vibrational frequency and all that, you know?
Right.
And then there's the desire that we have to explain everything. And if we can't explain it, we can always just say, well, it's interdimensional. That way, you know, we it's kind of like a freebie, a free pass for some of that stuff.
Well, yeah, but then it's like, okay, so that's where you as the interviewer could go deeper with that. So, well, what does that mean to you? You know,
right?
You know, well, it's I don't know. I read a comic book. You know, I mean, what's our relationship with interdimensional science? You know, and you know, and all we can do is extrapolate at this point. Yeah, that's why I enjoyed one of Neil deGrasse Tyson's spiels on, you know, where you have an idea, okay, like for instance, the moon is made of cheese.
Right. That's an idea.
Yeah, that's an idea, but now you want to turn it into hypothesis. So then you come up with other people or other papers written, well, yeah, the moon, you know, there's parts of that really are cheese. You know, all right, well, then from there, it turns into hypothesis. Well, then you've got to do further testing, maybe get some samples, you know, things like this. And they come back with these moon samples. God, look at this cheese. You know, now you got a theory going, okay, and eventually turns into fact. You know, and so, yeah, clouds drop rain, fact, you know.
Right.
The sun comes up in the morning, fact. You know, yeah, so and those are, and this is where, you know, I think we tend to, you know, like Bigfoot is real. Well, temporarily, you know, yeah, I mean, well, he's here, you know, but where is he the rest of the time? And this is where I become more of a skeptic in this, as far as, you know, the whole thing around, you know, that they're here 24/7 like some hominid.
Right. Yeah, that's harder to wrap my head around too, especially when you have incidents like you saw yourself of a footprint. Yeah. Well, you'll see often, or there's encounters or stories of seeing these tracks going, and they'll lead out into an opening and then nothing. They just disappear. You know, if they're not walking backward exactly in their steps, where did this animal go? You know, if it's just an animal, where did it go? Because no other tracks will just stop unless it can fly.
Right.
I wanted to ask you though too, Greg, before I know we've been on here for a minute, but when you described this thing, you said it's like 8.5 feet tall and these icy gray eyes, like something out of a Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, right? This Tarzan creature. Can you give a physical description of the rest? Like, you obviously you said it was more of an athletic build than the big boxy, you know.
Yeah, so very athletic, very could move very gracefully, you know, definitely heavy, stomp like this. I mean, this thing weighed something, you know, so definitely had some muscle mass,
right?
You know, and could just, I mean, I got the impression that this thing could easily run down a deer, no problem at all.
Wow.
You know, so as far as it being a predator, you know, basically an opportunistic omnivore, easily, you know, and could live off the land, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, and so I got no compunctions with that. I mean, and that was one of the things that actually made me rest easy at night, was because number one, I felt like I did all the right things. and I didn't have this thing throwing rocks at me, or I didn't have any of that going on, and I was in a tent. I mean, he could have walked over with a club and pummeled me, and that would have been that.
Right.
And instead it just disappeared into the night. In a way, I think that in some ways he probably thought that I was a failure, or it was something. What the hell is this idiot doing here, when it should have been like one of the doctors or shamans or somebody like this to communicate with him. And so in a sense, did I call this thing up, and then stupid me wasn't able to talk to him.
Well, it sounds like you accidentally did a ritual.
Right.
You said you got out of your car. Were you going to seek some kind of experience or encounter? Because you said you lit and you burnt sage when you got there.
Right.
Is that just something you do to calm yourself, or is that something that were you intentionally?
I do that a lot, sometimes on pack trips and stuff, burn a little sage, and a real nice, and so no campfire. I didn't have a campfire for the whole trip.
Wow.
Did not want it, didn't need it. There was a full moon. I mean, to hell with fire.
Right.
And so all of these things, I think, are markers for, it's like, okay, we've got a nature boy, coming up here, and we'll open ourselves to him.
Yeah.
And so that was what stuck with me. I mean, it was, and yeah, was I thinking all these things as I was going up there, and I might see Bigfoot. What's Bigfoot? It's Bigfoot. Probably, but
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that,
we're right, because I'm going out there by myself.
Right.
I knew it was a wild area, that the trails are unmaintained, and the Forest Service is just horrible about, but occasionally I'd see these cairns. So somebody had been there, so I was able to follow cairns, but I mean, there were parts there where like every 200 yards I was dropping my pack, finding the trail, grab the pack, go back and get the pack. You walk another 200 yards, drop the pack, find the trail.
Right.
They're done. I mean, kept going like that. That's why, 3 miles in one day, and exhausted after it, but it's just, and it's funny because in some respects I did try to mimic it and it didn't work, and so, and that's, is that really that dissimilar from going to church, and that one time that you went, there was Jesus,
Right.
And so I don't really think it really is, I mean, who has that experience? I mean, I'm sure some people do,
Right.
but most don't.
Yeah, that's like a classic Bigfoot hunter, or not Bigfoot hunter, but a ghost hunter. Yeah, if you go out and you catch paranormal evidence every single time you go out, you're hoaxing. you know what I mean? You had that chance encounter. You had that experience that was right there waiting for you to have at that moment. That was yours.
Right.
And it's not on our terms for when that kind of stuff happens, man.
Right. Yeah. And so, and that's, and it's just the wonderment of it all, I think that's how we have to release it, but yeah, I wrote about the experience. I wrote about my life, and, at the time also, because, I think we were, on a separate note, I was involved with a treasure hunt that went on for 25 plus years. And that was with a friend that he actually developed these machines, or helped develop these machines that, he traveled around the world finding gold in different capacities, using long range location equipment.
Awesome.
And also using like emysticity and tying in that with resisticity, that then created a carrier wave that then, could either find minerals, water, or like caverns, caves, stuff like that. And yeah, it's, so that was fun. And then from there, I'm also a student of the natural history, and also became an activist when I got married, or it was prior to getting married, actually. Well, I think it was during I got married, that I did a campaign to expand the Oregon Caves National Monument. And that was the same area where that guy, what was his name? I'll think of it here in a second. He was the one that the psychologist that saw Bigfoot up at the Oregon caves, and he's written all kinds of bizarre books about it. Matthew Johnson, I think.
I'm not familiar with him for some reason.
I have the book.
Matthew
here.
Johnson.
Yeah, he wrote this whole thing on the Sasquatch people, and I mean, it goes into the woo.
Xanu. I've heard of the Xanu.
Yeah. You know what? He's nuts.
Is he?
Well, I don't. I mean, it wasn't anything. Well, the thing with his thing, and several of my friends have pointed out, and also I knew the gal that interviewed him, because I'm familiar with the Park Service staff.
Right.
And so because I got involved with expanding the national monument there, and then that got me onto the board of the Crater Lake and Oregon Caves Natural History Association, where I still serve on that board today. And if I mention this to them, they just cringe, but with this, it's just that, the thing with his encounter, at least from what I was told, number one, it led to his divorce. Number two, the kids and the wife never saw anything. It was just him. And so the whole thing gets really flimsy,
Wow.
And so once again, did he experience an archetype?
Right.
And this is, I mean, and that's the thing with a lot of these encounters and sightings and people, I mean, I watch these movies about this stuff, and it's like, wow, you took the time to make a nest and then film it, and so I mean, it's really hard for me to say, wow, that's the God's honest truth,
Right.
and I can't buy it, but yet sprinkled in there, like this guy Tom Powell that wrote this book about edges of science, and I think that there's things that he touches on in there, like that quicksilver curtain, and I don't think he's far off the mark there. He's probably wrong, but not by much,
Yeah.
and because seriously, what does a portal look like? Is it some shimmering disc like what we see in any number of fantasy movies, or is it just this weird looking wavy thing in the air that you don't know what the hell it is until you walk through it and you're going, oh shit,
Yeah.
Pardon my French.
You're fine.
But I mean, that's where but at least I think they're coming close. And that's the thing with Ron Moorhead, is that he might not be 100% on this, but I think he's doggone close.
Oh yeah. I have his Quantum Bigfoot behind me here somewhere on that shelf.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so, and it's a must read, I feel like if you're really into the whole Bigfoot thing, I mean, it breaks down the science of it. And, and there's a couple of books on dimensional, and they get like Mount Shasta and the Lemurians and the tall purple people, or I mean, it makes for great cereal, but I don't know, I mean, it's just something that we really, at the end of the story, we're still left with questions.
That's it. That's with all of it. We're still sitting here right now with questions.
Right.
That's what I love about it. Greg,
Right.
let me ask you, can you tell everybody where to find you, where to find your book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I do have a website, www.theridgewalkers.com. The book is on Amazon. It takes a little bit of scrolling. It depends if you want the Kindle one. There was one I published in April, and then I went through and did a bunch of edits on it. And what I did was I blot out all the books, so that way I could have all the bad ones. But at any rate, and then there's one that's dated like May 15th that has all the edits, and it's got my personal story in there. And that's the one. So that's the one to purchase. Obviously would love reviews, and would love to be on the podcast again. And so, this has been great. But research your Cherokee there.
I will.
And go into that lore, and if you can pin down like who the more contemporary tribal people were from the Adena,
Right.
and I think that you'll be on a good thread there.
Yeah, we were more of a Shawnee area here.
Shawnee, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're all about local history and Native history. There's a whole lot to it here,
Oh, I bet. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's areas that are hotspots, around the United States, and they draw in this stuff. And if you know how to approach these places, and you get in there in the right thing, no campfires, don't bring your gun and all that stuff. Yeah, you'll see this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any plaster to make a plaster cast or,
Right.
So in a sense, my proof is just me,
Right.
or the provenance there. But I think we have a lot to learn in this, and I think that there's a lot more to look forward to.
Absolutely, I do too, and I appreciate you coming on. And definitely, I would love to have you back on anytime.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
your
much,
time.
Greg. You have a
All right,
good
thank you.
evening, and I'm gonna go on Amazon tonight and buy your book.
Okay, yeah, and go up on the website too, because I have my blog up there, and I need to add more to it. And ship's work is never done.
Absolutely right. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you.